What's up guys, VanGalta here, and we're back with another video. Video games are usually a mixed bag when it comes to developing characters. In some ways, video games can tell a character story in ways that no other form of media can. And I think this is most prevalent in modern storytelling, as are a lot of things these days. But to cut to the chase, you've probably heard all of this new bad, old good kind of stuff. But surely you join me in saying that modern storytelling is really not as good as it used to be. And I mean, this is just as prevalent in long-running franchises with new installments. Nowhere does this stand out to me as much as the hit video game series, Halo. Now, if I wanted to bring up an example of a mighty gaming giant that has been laid low over the past few years, then Halo would be a prime example. But of course, I'm not trying to talk about the downfall of Halo, I am comparing old Halo villains to new Halo villains. Specifically 343 Industries' Escharum and his Bungie counterpart, Tartarus. Hailing from the games of Halo Infinite and Halo 2 respectively, both are very similar characters, on a skin-deep level. They're both heavily featured brute villains who wield gravity hammers, just to name a few things. But in my recent playthroughs of all the Halo campaigns, mainline Halo games excluding 5 was garbage, I noticed these similarities between Tartarus and Escharum at a skin-deep level. But I wondered why Escharum bored me while Tartarus was so full of life, he was so interesting. So I set out to find what truly made these two hulking titans different. What made one interesting and the other boring. Throughout the course of this video, I am going to be explaining what makes Escharum a terrible villain and what makes Tartarus way better, in virtually every respect. Before we begin, I would just like to say that if you enjoyed the video, a like and a comment would be greatly appreciated, and smash that subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. This goes without saying that this video contains spoilers for video games that are between 2 and 18 years old. Alright, so let's start by analyzing Escharum as a villain and evaluating his character. Escharum is a brute chieftain who controls the Banished. Basically a Covenant spin-off, and they still want to kill humanity. That's it. That's all I could tell you about him. Technically, he's the successor of Atriox, whom you met in Halo Wars 2. It's just not that relevant to the story, especially since Atriox is more or less a one-off villain. From the start, we don't see anything that great about his character, but we do see a lot of bad things, which I'm going to begin listing off one by one. But the fact that Escharum doesn't strike us out of the gate and Tartarus does is a clear and present indicator that he's not going to be a very interesting villain. Problem number 1. Escharum has no plan other than to, quote-unquote, fulfill the will of Atriox without seriously considering what that entails. In case you didn't know, the Halo ring blows up all non-flood organisms in like a bonkers radius, effectively being a tactical nuke against anything that isn't a flood organism. Well, that means you, genius. I get that you can make the argument that he didn't know what would happen if he fired the ring, but I mean, Atriox did. Atriox knew what would happen if the ring was fired, and apparently he didn't pass this down to Escharum. Technically, closer to the end of the story, they tried to pass off Atriox's motivations to Escharum, but it doesn't really transfer. Escharum effectively has no plan other than to fire the ring for no apparent reason. Problem number 2. Escharum surrounds himself with other villains without really having a reason to do so. Escharum kind of has this weird Sinister Six relationship with a bunch of other villains in the video game, but it doesn't really make sense why he would ally himself with these characters. For example, he might need the Harbinger to rebuild the ring and fire it, but why does he care about firing the ring in the first place? It's kind of weird that he just has all the villains together in one place. Problem number 3. Terrible generic villain threats. There are many times in the campaign where just like he'll pop up on the green screen and he'll be like,
"Oh, Master Chief, you're doomed. I'm gonna kill you."
Man, all Escharum needs is a mustache, and like if he started twirling it, I would not be surprised. Most of his threats are just all the same "I shall end you" message, which is it's just really lame. It's so generic. Problem number 4. Escharum is almost always presented in a hologram or voice message, never showing up to do the work himself. Honestly, I'm not sure if Escharum is incompetent or lazy, but in either case, he's not scary. Escharum never shows up to do the work himself, therefore, why are we actually scared of the villain? Of course, the Master Chief is adept at dealing out death to all kinds of Banished and Covenant threats, so why should we be scared of his minions? So we're not scared of his minions, so why are we scared of him? Problem number 5. Escharum has no real goal outside of than just to destroy the universe because, you know, Because if problem number 1 makes him stupid for wanting to just basically retroactively destroy himself by firing the Halo ring, then problem number 5 just makes him look like a homicidal maniac. I guess he just wants to destroy the universe because, you know, evil. Villains are evil, right? Yeah, we talked about the generic villain taunts before. This is kind of in the same vein. He's Dr. Evil, basically. But the reason Dr. Evil works and Escharum doesn't is because Dr. Evil is a spoof and he's meant to mimic these villain tropes. Escharum just uses the tropes like it's actually good writing. Problem number 6. Any kind of meaningful development Escharum has appears 75% of the way through the campaign when we're past caring about him. I know he just has that little bit of,
Well, I guess we might have some kind of development on this character
later in the campaign, but at that point, it's not enough. I think they were trying to build up Escharum as kind of like an archenemy to the chief, like they're both soldiers, they're both only just following orders, that's what they do. But I just didn't connect with it, I was just past caring about him. His first impressions were just super bad, so I chose to be interested in other things. Problem number 7. Escharum never has anything new to say, is extremely predictable, and is just boring to watch. Whenever we get a cutscene with Escharum, it's always the same old thing. Well, Master Chief, you're gonna die. Blah, 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 blah. Let me move my hands like this. Nah, 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 nah. I just found myself asking the video game equivalent of, hey, is this gonna be on the test? Like, if the cutscene doesn't hold my attention and I'm only watching it because I think it'll be relevant later, I mean, you're doing something wrong. If he was just different in the way he presented himself every time, yet the same, then that could be really interesting. But instead, I basically got the same cutscene 21 times with minor changes. Problem number 8. Escherum's voice acting is as bland and generic as it possibly could be, and the written lines are meh. Look, I don't mean any offense to the voice actor here, but I literally could not tell the difference between Escharum and Atriox until halfway through the campaign. Escharum could just literally be any other brute as far as his voice acting is concerned. It's just the kind of generic, oh, grumbly voice, blah, 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 blah. Nothing about the performance really stood out to me and made me want to hear more of this character. He was just kind of just bleh. Alright, so that is a lot to unpack. Hopefully, I've explained it as well as I can. So let's take a look at Tartarus to see what he does better. Number 1. Tartarus essentially has the same plan as Escharum, but at this point he's acting out of ignorance of what the Halo rings really do. At this point in the Halo timeline, only a select group of people knew what the Halo rings actually did, and Tartarus was not one of them. Of course, after Halo 2, 3, 4, 5, Guardians, and Infinite, a lot more people should know what the Halo rings do. And as the Halo Infinite campaign showed us, even Atriox knew what the Halo rings did. Tartarus actually had no idea, and it wasn't reasonable to assume that he did. It actually is reasonable to assume that Escharum does, if at least Atriox does. Number 2. Tartarus always has a reason for choosing sides and allies. Tartarus is a very decisive villain in the Halo 2 story, and when he makes a decision like betraying the elites or siding with the prophets or whatever else he does, he always has a reason for doing it. Sometimes when Tartarus chooses sides and allies, it's only temporary, which kind of shows that he's out for himself kind of guy. Tartarus does a good bit of backstabbing and betrayal, but when he does, it's actually clearly laid out why he does it. Number 3. Tartarus doesn't make threats often, and when he does, they're concisely worded and don't take 5 minutes to get the point across.
Please use caution. This reclaimer is delicate.
One more word, Oracle, and I'll rip your eye from its socket. Which is nothing compared to what I'll do to you.
It's a good line, concisely delivered, and shows us what kind of person Tartarus is. While all of Escherum's threats are the same, long-winded, I will destroy you like I did so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, Tartarus favors quick, decisive action over planning. And it's clear that this is the case. Number 4. Tartarus is extremely proactive, very hands-on, and competent. Tartarus is as much a manipulator, a master planner, and architect of schemes as he is a foot soldier. He is an adept warrior in a lot of ways, and it shows throughout the story. This actually gives us a reason to be afraid of him because we actually believe he is capable of causing harm. Throughout the story, we see him brutalizing a lot of people, smashing his enemies, blah blah blah, you know, bad guy stuff. But Escharum actually doesn't do any of that. He just kind of cowers behind a screen and makes threats. We don't actually get to fight him until the very end, and I was actually wondering if he actually could fight. Of course, when you fight Tartarus, you can actually believe that you're gonna fight Tartarus because Tartarus does a lot of fighting, you know. Escharum doesn't really do any fighting, so how are we supposed to be afraid of him? him. Of course, that didn't stop me from getting my butt handed to me in my heroic run of the Halo Infinite campaign, but that's a subject for another time. Number 5. Tartarus has very clearly defined motivations. If you've played any of Halo 2, then you know that Tartarus has a reason for doing what he's doing, such as racism against elites, religious motivation, zealotry, currying favor with the prophets, etc. Tartarus is established early as a very ambitious character who likes to one-up his superiors. Tartarus ultimately is a very simple character, but simple isn't the same as bad. Escharam's character tries to give off a facade of being like a very deep character, but in reality is just super shallow. Look, you shouldn't scoff at a character just because they have very simple motivations. They just have to be there and they have to be well reasoned. Number 6. Tartarus' character is introduced and established within the first 5 minutes. We are very early on introduced to this character who, with minimal setup, will become a major force to be reckoned with in the story. Of course, the main focus in this cutscene is Thelvadamy, or the Arbiter, but at least Tartarus is there and he's playing a role. The first time we get Escharum, we get to see that I guess he's bad and he controls bad people. What's new? The point of introducing a character is not just to establish them, but to establish their character. We want to get to know the kind of person Tartarus is. We want to get to know the kind of person Escharum is. In Tartarus' case, we can at least infer that he's a sadistic fellow with a hatred for elites, and he probably has a bit of pride about him as well. With Escharum, we get nothing? Number 7. Tartarus has layers. He's unpredictable, and though he's of the same caliber of evil as Escharum, he makes much more sense. Tartarus is the kind of well-written character you can make plot twists with, because even though you know him, you don't know him. Tartarus is just different enough from all the other villains to make decisions that we don't really see coming. But from the beginning of the story, Escharam's plot only leads us to the logical conclusion that we must face him. He doesn't really do anything along the way, so there's like no room for plot twists. All the plot twists in the Halo Infinite story do not heavily rely on Escharam's character, which is partly why he's so boring. Tartarus is a minion for the most part, but we do see that he has goals and aspirations of his own. Those goals and aspirations, though they can be hidden sometimes, are what makes him a good villain. Number 8. Tartarus' voice acting isn't as deep and guttural, allowing greater concision in his lines, plus a much better voice actor portraying a broader spectrum of emotions. Tartarus' voice actor is definitely a step up from Escharam's, even though the games are like 16 years apart. Tartarus isn't just another one of your bumbling, grumbling brutes. He actually can portray a wide variety of emotions within his voice. He's a lot more interesting to listen to than the that Escharum does. Escharum is basically the same monotone grunt from beginning of the game to the end of the game, while I just find Tartarus' lines to be better delivered. So, what can we learn from this? Unlike Escharum, make your villain intelligent and crafty as opposed to ignorant and impotent. If you're writing your villain as just this kind of TV villain where he or she sits behind a screen and issues threats at the hero, then I think you're doing something wrong. I get it if you don't want to feature your villain too much for whatever reason, if you want to have like a more mysterious villain, I get that. But you actually have to make your villain terrifying, threatening, or scary in some way. Motivation, motivation, motivation. This one goes without saying, without exception, do it now. If your villain doesn't have a credible motivation, they're trash, okay? Get a good motivation, make sure it's credible, make sure it's relatable, whatever you want to do it, just make sure there's a motivation behind what the villain does. Death threats are overrated. They are to be expected, but they are nothing outside of just getting the job done. You can say, I'm going to finish my English paper in 1 hour, or you can actually just do it. If you're really trying to get the paper done, then which is the better alternative? So just like a villain who's trying to get a job done, don't have them just threaten about getting the job done, have them actually go out and do it. If your villain is predictable, you're relying too much on cliches. If at one point in the novel, your reader is like, oh, this is the part where he kidnaps the hero's girlfriend, and that's exactly what happens, then you are doing something wrong. You're doing something very, very wrong. Well-written villains will make decisions that are diabolically clever, yet somehow unexpected. So while it could be predicted that this villain would do such a thing, you really want to make it seem like that's just something that popped into their head. You want to make it look natural, and that's the deal. Usually cliches don't feel natural, and that's why we call them cliches. If your villain is predictable, then you're relying too much on them. You need to make them less predictable by excising some of those cliches and adding more original ideas. All in all, I would say that 343 Industries has had a really bad problem when it comes to writing compelling villains. Here I would cite the Didact from Halo 4 and Jameson Locke from Halo 5. Neither of them are really compelling villains. I mean, they deserve their own videos explaining why they're bad. The one exception I can think of is Atriox, but he wasn't exactly a one-off villain. I'm pretty sure he had some books about him, but in any case, 343 Industries is really bad at writing their villains. Bungie did a much better job. The biggest reason for 343 villains sucking is being that the villains often don't have a compelling excuse for their villainy, possibly the greatest pitfall when it comes to writing villains in general. It's really easy to lapse into the, oh, he's bad, therefore this villain do bad things, blah 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 blah. But that is exactly the wrong kind of mindset to be in. Your villains aren't bad because the plot needs them to be bad. The villains have their own character journey that leads them to being bad. Because in the end, that is at the core of what it means to write a good villain. To write a villain not as a plot device, but as a character. But anyway, guys, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, again, please like the video and drop a comment in the comment section down below. And if you want to see more content like this, then smash the subscribe button and turn notifications on. But in any case, I remain Van Gulta, and I'll see you in the next video.